Welcome to the Swine Nutrition Black Belt Podcast, the latest swine nutrition research digested for you. My name is Clayton Chastain, your host for today's episode. Today we are back with a second episode with Kayla Miller, a PhD student at Iowa State University. So I read about two different studies you performed. Let's start with the first one, which was about the peak infection periods of PRRS and the timing of certain diets to help mitigate the negative associated effects. Can you tell us a little bit about that study?
Yeah. So previous work from our group has suggested that feeding between 10 to 20% above what the NRC recommends for the lysine to energy ratio improves growth performance and feed efficiency during a PRRS challenge, both naturally and during an experimental challenge. However, with these two studies, the enhanced treatment diets were put in place at the time of the PRRS inoculation, or 𝗽�58. So it remains unclear that if we provide these diets at the time of peak infection or when you'd usually detect a PRRS outbreak in the field, if we would get that same growth response improvement. So to conduct this study, we used just shy of 500 grow-finished pigs that were fed over a 3-phase period from 𝗽𝗽𝗃, or when we inoculated with PRRS, all the way through market. These pigs were fed a common diet from the point of inoculation through to DPI-21, or roughly that peak infection time that we typically see with a PRRS outbreak. And then thereafter, they were placed on the experimental diets that were formulated to contain either 100%, 115%, or 130% of what the NRC recommends for the SID lysine to energy ratio. At DPI-0, all pigs received roughly 2 mils of PRRS 134 strain intramuscularly to ensure that all pigs got the same dosage of PRRS. So moving into some of the results from this study, during the second and third phase of finishing, or when these enhanced diets were put in place after what was estimated to be peak infection, we really saw no differences in growth performance parameters in either of the two phases. However, when we looked at the overall grow and finishing periods from DPI-0 all the way through market, we did see a slight improvement in overall feed efficiency when feeding at 130% of the NRC's recommendation.
So in a real scenario, like on a production level, obviously there's not going to be an inoculation period where they all get the disease at the same time, and it's going to like spread through the barn over time, and you might see it pop up in 1 or 2 pigs, and then all of a sudden it's everywhere. So how soon do you think, since this one didn't really work with the 21 days afterward, how soon do you think they would need to switch diets upon detection of the virus? Do you think it would be feasible, or do you think by the time they detect it would already be too late?
Yeah, so it's hard to give a pinpoint exact time on when these diets should be implemented. But like I previously mentioned, based on work from our group that was done by 𝗺𝗽liche and 𝗵𝗀𝗃, implementing these diets as close to the point of inoculation or when PRRS is detected shows to be beneficial in terms of mitigating the growth performance that's lost that we typically see during a PRRS outbreak. But however, like you had just mentioned, it's kind of not really logistical to switch diets at the exact time of an outbreak, as it's pretty unpredictable. So that's kind of how our study came as an idea for a more practical approach to both Wes and Jessica's studies. But overall, by the time PRRS will travel through a herd, the timing of these diets is really critical. But as soon as we can get these enhanced diets to these pigs, likely the better chance they'll respond and have better growth performance throughout the PRRS challenge.
Gotcha. And the beneficial effects that you see from starting it as soon as you can, from the extra lysine, the extra amino acids, is that just because those amino acids provide better natural immunity, or is there some more to the mechanism than that?
Yeah, I would say it definitely establishes a natural immunity, and it helps boost their immune system before really the peak of the PRRS hits them. And increasing that lysine to energy ratio does overall help the growth performance. So it definitely can be accredited to natural immunity before the peak of the disease curve hits them.
Gotcha. And do you or your team plan to do any more research on this? Maybe bump up the time from 21 days to 14, or any other testing any other ideas like that?
Yeah, as of now, we don't have any future plans on doing that, but I definitely think it'd be interesting to see if we bump up the time from, say, 21 to 14 or even 7, to see the effects of that and see if that could be a more practical approach. Because, yeah, 21 days could be almost too late. We don't know. And that's one of the drawbacks from this study, definitely.
Right. So let's go ahead and transition to that second study. So can you tell me a little bit about the second study, the one that was about improving performance of the poor health pigs through different nutritional strategies?
Yeah, so for this study, we were really interested in post-wean diarrhea with pigs that were challenged or that had historic challenges of enteric issues. So the production system we worked with had a consistent flow of pigs that always had enteric issues once they were placed after weaning. So we were interested in screening a few dietary strategies to try and mitigate the effects of those post-wean scours that come from that are one of the major symptoms from enteric diseases such as rotavirus and 𝗽𝗻𝗁𝗃𝗃 coli. So for this study, these pigs were fed over roughly a 9-week nursery program, which was split into 4 phases. Phases 1 and 2 were fed their treatment diets, and then phases 3 and 4 of the nursery program, all pens were fed a common diet. Phase 1 was fed for roughly 14 days, and phase 2 was also fed for roughly 14 days. So the 5 diets that we investigated within this study included our first, which was our control. This diet contained a low inclusion of soybean meal, where phase 1 contained roughly 15%, and phase 2 contained roughly 25% soybean meal. Our second diet had a high inclusion of soybean meal, where phase 1 had 35% and phase 2 had 45% soybean meal. Our third diet contained a 30% increase in the NRC's recommendation for branched chain amino acids. Our fourth diet contained a 2.1 inclusion of medium chain fatty acids containing a C8, C10, and C12 mix of fatty acids. And then our fifth treatment that we chose to look at was a high inclusion of modified oats at 20%. And throughout this study, we chose to compare all 4 of these diets to the low soybean meal, which served as our control throughout this study. Moving into just some of the results that we found, overall, we really didn't see too many differences with these treatment strategies when compared to the low soybean meal control. But focusing on the results for the medium chain fatty acids, where this treatment was really the only treatment that showed differences from that control. However, they weren't really beneficial. Average daily gain and feed intake were both negatively affected in phases 1 and 2, as well as the overall 9-week nursery period. But again, every other diet showed no differences in phase 1, 2, or overall performance.
Yeah, with those, it's kind of difficult to tell exactly what caused it or why there wasn't a response, especially with sick pigs. They can be all over the place. And maybe it was, since this was an inoculation one like the last one, it could have been something similar where you just had it fed or started the diets after their peak infection and they got it earlier on in the farrowing house. So yeah, those are always a little difficult, but I appreciate you coming on the show to talk about that study. And for everyone else, thank you for listening to the Swine Nutrition Black Belt podcast. Please visit us at swinenutritionblackbelt.com, and don't forget to subscribe to our podcast channel so you won't miss out on the next episode. See you next week. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and we are constantly on the lookout for the latest updates in swine nutrition. And if you have a swine nutrition related research trial that you would be able to share on our podcast, please send an email to nutritionblackbelt@swineit.com, and we would love to talk about your research. See you later.